Hi, everybody. Welcome to Odd Week Sunday School at St. Andrew's Covenant Presbyterian Church. I'm glad you're here. This week we have a lesson from Paul's letter to the Philippians. We've been on this month. And this section of the letter is about joy. What it is, how to practice it, and what it's good for. This is one of Paul's most beautiful passages that I'm about to read. And in some ways, it doesn't lend itself so much to analysis or to a Sunday school lesson as just to reading it over and over again. So maybe we should just read this every morning and let it sink into our bones. But this is a Sunday school lesson, so we're going to talk about it. Before we read this passage, let's remind ourselves about what else has been going on in this relatively short letter to the Philippians, and what we can maybe reconstruct about the context in which Paul wrote this letter. Remember that the church at Philippi in Macedonia was thought to be sort of Paul's favorite. Maybe it was his favorite because it made him joyful to think about these folks when he was away from them. The word joy and joyful appears in this letter over a dozen times. So it's sort of a Christian treatise on joy. Now, there was some kind of friction going on in this congregation between the church leaders, who were apparently two women named Euodia and Syntyche. And Paul also intimated elsewhere in the letter that maybe the folks at Philippi were cooling down a little bit or losing some of their passion that they had had at the beginning in their commitment to the faith. So whatever made Paul joyful about these people, apparently it wasn't that they were perfect. We don't know for sure when Paul wrote this letter, which the scholars today, many of them tell us, probably is composed by some editor of 3 letters that Paul wrote to the Philippians at different times. But many of the scholars believe that when he wrote chapter 4, the part I'm about to read from, that Paul was in prison in Rome. And maybe even not his first imprisonment, which was sort of house arrest, but his second actual imprisonment in a prison. There is a sense in this letter that, Paul feels maybe that death is hanging over him, that it's getting nearer. At any rate, he really doesn't know what's going to happen to him. That's palpable. He doesn't know when he will see these people again, although he expresses hope that he will see them again. So that's something interesting to keep in mind about Paul's possible circumstances when he was writing this letter about joy. So let's read it. It's from Philippians chapter 4, verses 1 through 9. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, my beloved. I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you also, my loyal companion, help these women, for they have struggled beside me in the work of the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. Okay, so what is this joy that Paul is describing here in this passage? It doesn't seem to be just the same as happiness, does it? Whatever it is, it doesn't seem to come from a set of wonderful circumstances, from freedom, from good health, from nice travel plans to look forward to, from perfection in the church, from having no worries. Whatever this joy is, it's something that Paul can experience in the midst of ordinary worries and maybe also in the midst of extraordinary difficulties. Paul addresses them, the people of this church, and he says they are his joy and his crown. That is his laurel wreath, as though, they were his prize that he won in some athletic contest. Thinking about them persisting in their true and generous faith gives Paul comfort and satisfaction, maybe a sense that his life has been well used, and confidence, even hope, in his dire circumstances and in spite of whatever's going to happen to him next. How does somebody acquire this kind of joy that isn't dependent upon happy circumstances? Well, here Paul is pretty specific, and it's interesting his advice or his exhortations. He uses a whole list of plural verbs. Greek is one of those languages, like many of them, where you can tell whether someone is talking to just one person or to many people. It's the plural you. And Paul is addressing many people here. That's clear. So whatever this joy is that Paul's talking about, it's a group thing. And what he tells us in verse 8 is to make a sort of a joy inventory. And this wouldn't be a bad exercise for us in the week ahead, maybe. And to think about these things that we put on our list. As though joy is, and here's a quotation from the Feasting on the Word curriculum, as though joy is a discipline of perception rather than an emotion dependent on circumstances. Say that one more time. Joy is a discipline of perception rather than an emotion dependent on circumstances. So is he saying that joy is in how we see things, and even in the midst of real and ongoing trouble, anxiety, and even maybe suffering? What Paul suggests that it is that people choose to think about certain kinds of things. What things? And here he lists them. Think about what's true, what's honorable, what's just, what's pure, what's pleasing, what's commendable, what's excellent, what's praiseworthy. Now, we may believe that what we do is more important than what we think about. But here Paul suggests that the two are pretty closely connected, because what we put into our heads affects what we do with our hands and feet. What we see, what we fill up our eyes with, what we fill up our ears with, what we choose to stuff our minds with, this is connected to what we will do. And he makes the connection explicit in the next verse when he links thinking about the true, the just, and the commendable things to doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me. It's as though Paul is saying, you know what's good to think about. You know what's good to do. And God's peace is the result of thinking on and doing those things. You know that. So choose to think about those things as a matter of regular discipline. Is Paul actually telling the Philippians that joy is a choice? Well, why should we choose it? Why should we even try to rejoice always? Is that really responsible in times like these? Maybe it's better to concentrate on the lies, the failures, the miseries, the egregious behavior of others, the problems of the world, the anxieties of our times, and the worries of our own lives, because they're real. Well, Paul's word here is a word for ordinary people doing ordinary things in ordinary time. In the liturgical calendar, the season between Pentecost and Advent, where we are now, is called ordinary time. And I think we've come to think about ordinary time as ordinary in the sense that there's this long stretch of time when there are no big holidays, at least not in the church calendar. So they're ordinary, nothing special. But what ordinary meant originally was just that it was time that was being counted, like an ordinal number. Time just ticking away as it does, 1 second at a time. The liturgical color for this season of the year is green, like the summer season that it mostly encompasses. The leaves change shades of green as they mature. Day after summer day, things grow to fullness, to maturity, to the time of producing fruit or grain, and we hardly notice it happening. So where's the joy in all that ordinariness? Well, this is what Paul is reminding his friends at Philippi. That it's in knowing that we're in the hands of a loving God. It's in attending to the fact and noticing that the Lord is near. It's in realizing that what worries us should be the stuff of prayers, and that we can lay these burdens down when we lay them before our strong and attentive God. And it's in the peace that's available to us all together, the peace that doesn't entirely make sense, a peace that's too deep to put into words. Besides reminding them, Paul's also encouraging them, because there is work to do. And cultivating the perception of joy by thinking about the true and the good may just be the way to get up the courage to get up and do it. Because when we think about what's excellent and what's praiseworthy, it doesn't mean that we're pretending the world is not a sad and hurting place. But we remind ourselves that the Lord of justice and mercy is near. Near enough to help keep us going. Near enough to inspire us to try again. So that we can, as Paul says to the Philippians, keep doing what we've been doing and maybe even try something new. Paul encourages his flock to practice noticing joy, to practice attending to the peace that passes understanding, not just so they can have an undisturbed nap, but also so that they can continue to draw other people's attention to the truth about God through how they treat each other and how they serve. The least motivating thing of all is despair. The most motivating thing is hope. And all through his letters, Paul makes it clear over and over again that joy, hope, love, and peace are close kin. When we practice one of them, we find that the others also increase in us. And armed with these things, we can be the church that we're meant to be. So what does it mean, finally, to practice joy? Well, you know what practicing is. It's like practicing the piano, practicing the trumpet, practicing shooting baskets, practicing playing golf, tying knots, maybe even practicing operating on people. You don't expect to become much of a pianist or much of a surgeon by just waiting until you feel that you are one. You make yourself practice, maybe even when you're tired of it, or when you think you'll never get the hang of it, or when you have just failed at it. And what eventually makes you good at the thing you're practicing is less that you're a great genius than that you just set an intention to do it every day. As day after ordinary day pile up, you acquire the skill, and you never know exactly when it happened. And one day this thing you've been practicing might produce beautiful music that moves someone's heart, or you might save somebody's life. Practice doesn't necessarily make perfect, but it may make good enough. So Paul reminds and encourages his friends in the church at Philippi to practice joy. And he shows them how, because it will make them do something out of hope. See you next time.